They say time heals all wounds. But for a woman who has spent her entire life as a ghost discarded and trampled upon time isn't a cure. It is a sentence. Kaia once thought that when she took the hand of Julian Vane, the most ruthless alpha king in the underworld, and walked out of her family's personal hell, her days of bleeding were over. She was wrong. The love between an alpha of pure destruction and a queen of primordial creation isn't a fairy tale. It is a forbidden anomaly. And the world would never let them exist in peace. For 6 months, the ironclad spire had ceased to be a cold fortress of glass and steel. It had become a sanctuary. Kaia's belly was now heavy, physically displaying the undeniable proof of the empire she and Julian were building together. She was carrying the heir to the ironclad pack, a child forged from the two most powerful bloodlines in history, the Onyx Wolf and the Aether. But a miracle comes with a price, and the price was Kaia's vitality. The pup's power was growing too fast, evolving beyond the limits of a human-like body that had never fully shifted. The ether magic was restless, violently unpredictable. With every kick of the baby, a pulse of violet light would bleed from Kaia's skin, draining her life force. Julian, the Alpha King, who made Chicago's deadliest monsters tremble, spent his nights on his knees beside their bed. He would press his forehead against her swollen stomach, his massive hands trembling as he fed his own raw energy into her just to keep her breathing. His golden eyes were perpetually bloodshot, lined with the kind of frantic desperation only a helpless god could know. He could slaughter an army of thousands, but he could not fight the invisible force that was slowly devouring the woman he loved. But the true tragedy wasn't growing inside her. It was gathering at their gates. It happened on a night when the sky broke open, weeping a torrential, freezing rain over the city. The Spire's state-of-the-art security systems didn't just fail, they were suffocated by ancient, suffocating dark magic. The heavy oak doors of the penthouse didn't open, they exploded inward, reduced to splinters. Stepping through the ruined threshold was the Apex Syndicate, the Supreme Council of Elders who had ruled the shifter world from the shadows for millennia. And leading them was Caius. Caius was an ancient hybrid, the very man who 20 years ago had visited the Sterling Pack to inspect a potential bride, only to look at a 5-year-old Kaia and declare her a genetic wasteland, a disgusting mistake of evolution. Now Caius stood in Julian's home, his hollow eyes fixed not on Kaia, but on her stomach. The greed radiating from him was a physical stench. The ancient laws are absolute, Julian. Caius's voice grated like rusted iron dragging across stone. Darkness and light cannot merge. That child is a paradox of nature, and its very existence is fracturing the magical equilibrium of our world. Hand the vessel over, or your entire ironclad pack will be butchered in their sleep before dawn. Julian didn't speak. In the brutal world of shifters, his silence was infinitely more terrifying than a roar. He slowly stripped off his suit jacket, letting it drop to the floor. Underneath, his white shirt was already straining as his muscles expanded, the map of scars and tattoos across his skin, glowing with the molten gold of his enraged beast. "Take one more step, Caius." Julian growled, the sound vibrating so deeply it rattled the crystal decanters on the bar. "Take one more step, and I will use your ribs to build my child's crib." The battle that erupted wasn't a fight. It was a cataclysm. But it wasn't fair. The elders didn't bring mercenaries or guns. They brought witches' bane, invisible chains forged from dark magic designed to target the soul rather than the flesh. Julian fought like a demon dragged straight from the depths of hell. He didn't bother fully shifting. The confined space required surgical brutality. He was a blur of lethal motion, his claws tearing through mystical armor, his fangs crushing windpipes. He remained positioned firmly in front of Kaia, an impenetrable wall of muscle and absolute devotion. Not a single blade, not a single spell made it past him. But Caius was a coward who had lived for 1,000 years by never fighting fair. While Julian was busy ripping the throat out of 2 Syndicate elites, Caius began chanting in a forgotten guttural tongue. He didn't aim his spell at the Onyx Alpha. He aimed a sphere of concentrated corrosive black magic at the ceiling just above where Kaia was huddled against the marble wall. "Kaia!" Julian roared. He abandoned his defense, taking 3 silver-tipped blades directly into his back as he dove across the room, wrapping his massive body around hers. He absorbed the physical collapse of the ceiling, but the dark magic was ethereal. A shockwave of black energy bypassed Julian's physical shield entirely and slammed directly into Kaia's abdomen. Kaia's eyes went wide, the breath knocked from her lungs. The world tilted violently on its axis. A pain so profound, so utterly agonizing, ripped through her core that she couldn't even find the voice to scream. She collapsed against the cold floor. Beneath the hem of her white silk gown, a dark, terrible red began to bloom. It pooled on the pristine marble, a stark, horrifying contrast. No. The baby." Kaia gasped, her trembling, blood-stained hands clutching her stomach. The beautiful violet aura that usually danced across her skin flickered violently, sputtering like a dying candle in a hurricane. Her ether magic was draining, pouring out of her alongside her lifeblood. Julian fell to his knees in the pool of his wife's blood. The most feared man in the world was shaking uncontrollably. He pressed his large hands over her stomach, desperately trying to physically hold the life inside her. Tears, something the Alpha King hadn't shed since he was a beaten child, spilled from his golden eyes, mixing with the blood on her pale face. I'm here, my soul. I've got you." Julian sobbed, pressing his forehead against hers. "Don't close your eyes. Look at me, Kaia. Keep looking at me." Kaia stepped forward, stepping over the mutilated bodies of his own men, a victorious smirk twisting his scarred face. Surrounding him, the remaining elders began to chant, raising a shimmering cage of magical containment around Julian. "She is dying, Julian," Caius mocked, adjusting his cuffs. "Her pathetic mortal body cannot heal a curse of that magnitude. Her ether is bleeding out. Give her to me. Only the Syndicate's magical incubators can keep that pup alive now. But in exchange..." Caius paused, his eyes sweeping over Kaia's fading form with utter disgust. "You surrender all rights to her. She goes back to being a laboratory rat for the elders, exactly as she was destined to be 20 years ago." Julian held Kaia tightly to his chest, feeling her heartbeat stutter and slow. His frantic eyes darted between his pale, bleeding wife and the smug, wretched face of Caius. He was an alpha. His every instinct screamed at him to rip Caius's head from his shoulders, to fight until his own heart stopped beating. But if he kept fighting, Kaia would be dead in 3 minutes. All his wealth, his armies, his terrifying reputation, none of it could stitch her womb back together. He couldn't save her with his strength. He could only save her by breaking his own heart. And hers. Julian slowly stood up. The silver blades were still lodged in his back, his blood dripping heavily onto the floor. He forced his facial muscles to relax. He buried the shattering agony in his chest beneath a mask of absolute glacial indifference. It was the face of the monster Kaia had first met in that boardroom, the ruthless CEO who traded lives for profit. "Julian," Kaia whispered. She reached out with a weak, bloody hand, her fingers weakly gripping the hem of his dark trousers. "Don't. Please don't let them take me." Julian bit the inside of his cheek so hard his mouth filled with copper. He looked down at her, forcing his eyes to turn cold, dead, and empty. He reached down, grabbed her fragile wrist, and deliberately, firmly peeled her fingers off his clothes. The gesture was so profoundly cold, it seemed to freeze the air in the room. "It's a deal," Julian said. His voice was flat, devoid of a single ounce of humanity, directed entirely at Caius. "Save the pup. It's the only asset I actually care about. As for the woman..." Julian let out a cruel, dismissive sigh. "I'm tired of playing nursemaid to a weak, defective runt. Get her out of my sight." The words acted as a second, infinitely more lethal curse. "A defective runt. The only asset I care about." The physical pain in Kaia's abdomen vanished entirely, eclipsed by the absolute annihilation of her soul. Her vision tunneled. The man who had shown her the stars, the man who kissed her scars and called her a queen, had just looked at her with the same disgust her father once had. She wasn't his mate. She had never been his equal. She was just an incubator, a piece of defective machinery he was trading away the moment it broke. The betrayal sliced through her heart with a jagged, rusty blade. The bond between them violently snapped. Kaia didn't scream. She just closed her eyes, letting a single tear slip down her cheek, as the utter darkness of unconsciousness swallowed her whole, blissfully unaware, as two Syndicate guards grabbed her by the arms and dragged her bleeding body out the door. Julian stood perfectly still, a statue of stone and blood, as he watched them drag his entire universe away. He knew she hated him. He prayed she hated him. Because the pure burning fire of betrayal and hatred would be the only thing strong enough to keep her fighting to stay alive. The moment the elevator doors dinged closed, the magical containment field fell. Julian dropped to his knees. The mask shattered into a million pieces. He threw his head back and let out a roar of such profound, apocalyptic grief that the remaining glass in the penthouse exploded outward into the rainy night. It was the agonizing howl of a wolf whose soul had just been torn out of his chest. With trembling, blood-soaked hands, he pulled his phone from his pocket and hit the single emergency contact. Lucian. Julian rasped, his voice no longer human. It sounded like the grinding of tectonic plates, a promise of the end of the world. Alpha. Mobilize the entire death squad. Activate the annihilation protocol. I don't want a rescue mission. Julian growled, pulling the silver blades from his own back, his eyes burning with a blinding lethal gold. I want a massacre. Kaia woke to the biting sting of freezing air and the suffocating scent of bleach, rust, and ancient blood. She was lying on a slab of solid freezing steel deep within the subterranean laboratories of the Apex Syndicate's mountain fortress. Heavy, rune-carved silver cuffs bound her wrists and ankles, burning into her skin, effectively locking away whatever fragile remnants of ether magic she had left. Thick, glowing IV tubes were pierced into her arms, pumping a sickly green magical fluid into her veins, not to heal her, but to artificially sustain her heart rate just long enough to extract the pup. Standing over her, polishing a surgical scalpel made of pure, unadulterated silver, was Caius. Tragic, isn't it? The elder sneered, tracing the flat of the blade against Kaia's pale cheek. Sold by your father and now discarded like a broken toy by your alpha. You were born a surplus to requirements, Kaia. But do not despair. Once I cut this miraculous ether pup from your womb, your death will finally serve a purpose for the Syndicate. Kaia didn't cry. The tears had dried up on the floor of the ironclad penthouse. Staring up at the sterile fluorescent lights, she felt nothing but a sprawling, echoing emptiness. The physical pain in her abdomen was a distant hum compared to the absolute slaughter of her soul. I am tired of playing nursemaid to a weak, defective runt. Julian's cold, dead voice played on a continuous, agonizing loop in her mind. She had believed in him. She had given him her heart, her body, her future. And in her most desperate hour, when she was bleeding out on the floor, he had looked at her with disgust. She was nothing to him. She had never been his queen. Prepare the extraction, Caius barked to a team of masked Syndicate surgeons hovering nearby. The mother's heart is failing. We take the pup now. As the cold silver scalpel hovered over her swollen belly, something inside Kaia shifted. It wasn't a spark of magic. It was a physical, violent kick from deep within her womb. The pup wasn't dying. The pup was enraged. And suddenly Kaia understood. The baby hadn't been draining her magic to weaken her. The pup's immense power had been trying to merge with hers, preparing her body for a catastrophic evolution. She had been fighting the magic, trying to keep it contained like a frightened human girl. But she wasn't a human girl, and she wasn't Julian Vane's discarded property. If there was no one left in this brutal world to protect her, if the Alpha King had abandoned her to the wolves, then she would simply have to become the monster that the wolves feared in the dark. Begin the incision, Caius ordered. The silver blade pressed into her skin. No, it wasn't a scream. It was a seismic event. The green IV tubes shattered instantly, spraying magical fluid across the room. The entire underground facility violently shuddered as the temperature plummeted below freezing. "What is happening?" Caius yelled, stumbling backward as the steel surgical table began to groan and buckle. The violet aura that Kaia had always possessed, the soft, gentle light of gravity, was gone. In its place, a blinding, terrifyingly brilliant white light erupted from her chest, so intense it blew out the surgical lights and shattered the bulletproof observation windows above. The silver cuffs binding her didn't just break. They disintegrated into fine gray dust, their atomic structure annihilated by pure ether energy. Kaia levitated inches above the ruined table, her eyes snapping open. They were no longer the soft human green, they were twin stars of incandescent blazing white. Then the agonizing, beautiful sound of bones snapping echoed through the room. For 20 years her father had suppressed her. For 6 months the world had underestimated her. Now the dam broke. Kaia didn't just shift, she exploded into her true form. The white light consumed her human body, expanding, growing, and reshaping until the light faded, revealing a creature of myth and legend. Standing in the center of the ruined laboratory was the White Wolf. She was colossal, even larger than Julian's Onyx Alpha. Her fur was as pure as freshly fallen snow, radiating a soft, ethereal halo of starlight. But there was nothing gentle about her. Her fangs were long, pearlescent daggers, and her eyes held the primordial, crushing weight of the cosmos. She was the Ether Queen, fully realized, fully awake, and vibrating with the wrath of a mother pushed to the absolute edge. Caius fell to his knees, his arrogant sneer replaced by mind-shattering terror. "Impossible," he choked out, crawling backward in the blood and glass. You were a runt." The White Wolf didn't growl. She simply took a step forward. The gravity in the room instantly magnified 100-fold. The masked surgeons were flattened to the floor, their ribs instantly cracking under the atmospheric pressure. Caius was pinned face down against the concrete, gasping for breath as the invisible weight crushed his lungs. In Caius's mind, a female voice resonated, cold, echoing, and absolute. It was a telepathic command that bypassed his ears and struck directly at his soul. "I am not a runt, Caius." The White Queen's voice vibrated through his very bones. "I am your end." The massive White Wolf opened her jaws, revealing a throat glowing with pure, destructive white fire, and clamped her fangs down over the Elder's head. With one effortless, sickening crunch, the reign of the Apex Syndicate was decapitated. While the White Wolf awoke in the depths of the earth, an apocalypse was descending upon the mountain above. The ironclad Death Squad didn't attack with strategy. They attacked with a tidal wave of pure, concentrated violence, and at the spearhead of that wave was Julian Vane. He had shifted into the Onyx Wolf before the armored transport helicopters even touched the ground, leaping 100 feet into the blinding snowstorm. He was a massive, midnight black shadow moving with a speed that defied physics. Julian wasn't fighting to win a war. He was a suicide missile aiming straight for the heart of the fortress. He didn't care if he lived to see the sunrise. He only cared about reaching Kaia. "I'm coming, my soul. I'm coming." The Syndicate's elite guards opened fire with heavy artillery loaded with silver-tipped rounds. Julian took the hits. Bullets tore into his massive black shoulders and flanks, spraying hot blood onto the pristine snow. He didn't even flinch. He used the pain. Every burning sting of silver was a welcome punishment, a penance for the unforgivable words he had been forced to speak to his mate. He tore through the fortified courtyard, his massive jaws snapping heavily armored men in half. He didn't stop to finish them. He left a trail of mangled bodies and crimson snow for Lucian and his death squad to clean up. Julian crashed through the main oak doors of the stronghold, splintering them into kindling. Inside the grand hall, 3 elders stood waiting, chanting a barrier spell of dark, suffocating magic. The Onyx Wolf didn't slow down. Julian lowered his massive head and rammed directly into the magical barrier. The dark magic scorched his fur, burning his flesh down to the muscle, but his momentum was unstoppable. The barrier shattered like cheap glass. Julian lunged, taking the throat of the first elder, using his massive paws to crush the chest cavity of the second, and throwing the third through a solid stone pillar. He was breathing heavily, his black fur matted with his own blood, his golden eyes burning with a deranged, desperate light. He could smell it. Beneath the scent of ozone and blood deep underground, he could smell vanilla old books and the metallic tang of Kaia's blood. He shifted back into his human form to navigate the narrow subterranean stairwell. He was bare-chested, covered in deep bleeding lacerations, his muscles trembling from the sheer amount of silver in his system. But the adrenaline of a dying king kept him moving. He reached the bottom of the stairs. Blocking his path was a massive 10-inch thick vault door made of solid steel locked from the inside. Julian didn't look for a keypad. He didn't call for explosives. He wedged his bloodied bare fingers into the hairline crack between the two steel doors. He let out a primal guttural roar, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony and desperation. The muscles in his back bunched and strained, the veins in his neck bulging as he called upon every ounce of alpha strength he possessed. With a deafening shriek of tearing metal, Julian Vane physically ripped the steel vault doors off their hydraulic hinges and threw them aside. He burst into the laboratory, his chest heaving, his claws extended, fully prepared to slaughter everyone inside to get to his bleeding wife on the surgical table. But he froze. The room was destroyed. The Syndicate surgeons were dead, crushed flat against the floor. Caius's headless corpse lay in a pool of blood. And standing in the center of the wreckage, bathed in a breathtaking, blinding aura of white light, was a wolf larger and more magnificent than anything Julian had ever seen in his lifetime. The white wolf turned her massive head, her incandescent white eyes locked onto Julian. And in those eyes, Julian saw no recognition. He saw no love. He saw only the cold, hard judgment of a queen looking at the man who had betrayed her. The white wolf let out a low, earth-shaking snarl and took a slow, predatory step toward the bleeding Alpha King. The subterranean laboratory was dead silent save for the ragged, heavy breathing of the Alpha King and the low, atmospheric hum of the white wolf's ether energy. Julian stood at the ruined threshold of the vault, his bare chest heaving, his muscles shredded by silver and dark magic. He was bleeding from a dozen lethal wounds, but he didn't feel the pain. All he felt was the crushing, suffocating weight of the white wolf's stare. Kaia didn't see the man who had just ripped through an army of immortals to reach her. She only saw the Alpha who had looked at her as she bled on their bedroom floor and called her a defective runt. The white wolf let out a snarl that shook the dust from the concrete ceiling. She lunged. She moved with a speed that eclipsed even the Onyx Alpha. A blur of blinding white light crashed into Julian, throwing his massive frame backward into the stone wall. The impact cracked the foundation of the fortress. Kaia pinned him to the floor, her colossal paws pressing into his wounded chest, her razor-sharp pearlescent fangs snapping inches from his face. The heat of her breath, smelling of ozone and starlight, washed over him. Her jaw opened wider, preparing to tear the throat out of the king who had betrayed her. Julian didn't struggle. He didn't shift into his beast to match her strength. He didn't even raise his hands to defend himself. Instead, the most terrifying, ruthless alpha in the global underworld did the unthinkable. He surrendered. Julian retracted his claws. He let his arms fall limp to his sides, resting on the cold, blood-stained floor. He tilted his head back, exposing the vulnerable flesh of his throat, the ultimate, absolute sign of submission in the shifter world. He looked up into the blazing white eyes of the creature who was about to kill him, and he smiled. It was a broken, beautiful, agonizing smile. "Do it," Julian whispered, his voice cracking, choked with blood and tears. "Tear out my throat, my queen. I deserve it." The white wolf froze her fangs, grazing his pulse point. She growled, a sound of profound confusion and lingering fury, pressing her weight harder against his chest. Tears spilled from Julian's golden eyes, tracking through the soot and blood on his cheeks. "I am so sorry, Kaia," he sobbed, his chest heaving under her massive paws. I am so damn sorry. But I had to do it. Caius's curse was killing you and I couldn't stop it. If you had stayed connected to me, you would have died in my arms. I had to sever the bond. I had to make you hate me. He reached up with a trembling, bloodied hand. He didn't try to push her away. He gently, reverently buried his fingers into the thick, glowing white fur of her cheek. I had to break your heart to keep it beating. Julian wept, his voice a raw, shattered plea. I would rather live the rest of my cursed life knowing you despise me than live a single second in a world where you don't exist. So kill me, Kaia. Take your vengeance. But please, tell me you and our pup are safe. The words didn't just hit Kaia's ears. They struck the very core of her soul. Suddenly, the severed mate bound the invisible tether between their spirits that had been brutally snapped hours ago, violently slammed back into place. It hit Kaia like a tidal wave. She didn't just hear his explanation, she felt his memories. She felt the apocalyptic terror that had gripped his heart when he saw her bleeding. She felt the physical sensation of his soul ripping in half as he forced himself to speak those cruel words to her. She felt the suicidal desperation that had driven him to run through a hail of silver bullets just to die at her feet. He hadn't discarded her. He had sacrificed his own soul to buy her a chance at survival. The blazing white anger in the white wolf's eyes shattered, replaced by a profound weeping sorrow. The colossal beast let out a whimper that sounded entirely too human. The blinding light enveloped her again. The massive wolf form began to shrink, the bones reshaping the fur, dissolving into ether energy. When the light faded, Kaia was human again. She wasn't the bleeding, dying girl anymore. The ether had healed her perfectly. She knelt on the floor over Julian, her heavily pregnant belly resting gently against his chest. She was glowing with a soft, ethereal halo, her tears falling like liquid diamonds onto his bloodied face. You stupid, beautiful, reckless monster! Kaia sobbed, throwing her arms around his neck and burying her face in his shoulder. Julian let out a breathless, broken gasp, wrapping his massive arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him as if he were trying to merge their bodies into one. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of vanilla and rain, shaking uncontrollably as he wept into her neck. I've got you, Julian chanted like a madman, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I've got you, my soul. I'm here. I know. Kaia whispered, holding his face in her hands, pressing her forehead against his. We're safe, Julian. The pup is safe. The ether. It didn't just wake up. It evolved. For a singular, perfect moment, the dark underground laboratory felt like heaven. But heaven is a fleeting thing when you are in the belly of hell. How incredibly touching! A cold, aristocratic voice echoed from the shattered doorway. A Shakespearean tragedy playing out right in my basement. Julian instantly shoved Kaia behind his back, his onyx wolf roaring to the surface as he pushed himself to his feet. Despite his lethal injuries, he stood like an impenetrable wall of muscle and rage. Standing at the entrance of the lab was Kaelin I of the Apex, the supreme leader of the Global Shifter Council. Behind him poured a small army of the Syndicate's final, most elite guards, all armed to the teeth with heavy artillery and enchanted silver blades. Kaelin looked at the headless corpse of Caius, then at the glowing pregnant Kaia, and finally at the bleeding Alpha King. I must admit, I underestimated the Runt. Kaelin sneered, drawing a long, jagged sword that pulsed with dark magic. The ether hasn't been seen in centuries. It is a magnificent prize. Julian, you have fought valiantly, but look at you. You are bleeding out. You have nothing left. I will take the queen, I will harvest the pup, and I will mount your onyx head on the gates of the spire. Over my dead body! Julian snarled, his fangs elongating, ready to throw himself into a suicide charge just to buy Kaia time to run. But a soft, warm hand suddenly placed itself flat against the center of Julian's broad back. No, my king, Kaia's voice rang out. It wasn't the trembling whisper of the girl from the boardroom. It was the calm, absolute authority of a deity. Kaia stepped out from behind Julian. Julian reached for her in a panic, but she gently intertwined her fingers with his bloodied ones, squeezing tight. She didn't hide. She stood shoulder to shoulder with the most dangerous man on earth, light and dark, standing in perfect defiance. "You called me a runt, Kaelin." Kaia said, her voice echoing with a strange dual resonance as if 1,000 ancient queens were speaking through her vocal cords. "You built an empire on the belief that the strong have the right to break the weak. You judged my worth by my inability to shift." Kaelin laughed, a harsh barking sound. "And I was right. You are an anomaly, a freak of magic. Kill the alpha, capture the female," he ordered his men. The elite guards raised their weapons, preparing to unleash a storm of silver and death. Kaia didn't flinch. She simply raised her free hand, her palm facing the army. "Let me show you," Kaia whispered, her eyes flashing from green to blinding white, "what true weakness feels like." She didn't summon gravity this time. She summoned purification. A shockwave of pure, incandescent white light erupted from her palm, moving faster than the speed of sound. It washed over the entire room, passing right through Julian without harming a single hair on his head, and slammed into Kaelin and his army. It didn't burn their flesh. It did something far worse. The dark magic powering Kaelin's sword evaporated into harmless smoke. The elite guards screamed a horrifying chorus of agony as they dropped their weapons and fell to their knees. The ether light was reaching into their very souls and ripping their wolves away. Bones cracked in reverse. The muscular, imposing forms of the Syndicate alphas began to wither and shrink. The connection to their feral strength, their accelerated healing, their immortal grace, it was all violently severed. Within seconds, the blinding light faded, leaving behind absolute devastation. The elite guards were no longer elite. They were just ordinary, fragile, terrified human men weeping on the floor as they realized their inner beasts had been permanently erased from existence. Kaelin was on his hands and knees, staring at his trembling, purely human hands in sheer horror. The supreme leader of the shifter world had just been forcibly turned into the very thing he despised most. He was a runt. My wolf." Kaelin gasped, looking up at Kaia with wide, terrified eyes. "What did you do to me? Give it back. Give it back." "You are now exactly what you thought I was," Kaia said coldly, her ether aura pulsing softly. "A genetic dead end, a surplus to requirements. Live the rest of your mortal, fragile life with that knowledge." One of the newly turned human guards, driven mad by the loss of his wolf, pulled a concealed silver pistol from his boot and aimed it frantically at Kaia. He never even got to pull the trigger. Julian moved like a shadow of pure vengeance. Before the man's finger could twitch, Julian was there. The Alpha King's claws sheared through the man's wrist, sending the gun clattering to the floor, followed instantly by a brutal backhand that sent the guard flying across the room unconscious. Julian stood over the whimpering, powerless remnants of the Apex Syndicate. He didn't bother killing them. Death was a mercy they no longer deserved. Living as weak, vulnerable mortals in a world they used to terrorize was the ultimate absolute justice. Julian turned back to Kaia. He was covered in blood, panting heavily, but as he looked at his glowing, powerful mate, his golden eyes softened into absolute reverent worship. He walked over to her, dropping to one knee amid the ruins of the Syndicate's empire, and pressed his face gently against her pregnant stomach. "My queen," Julian whispered, his voice thick with awe. "My beautiful, terrifying queen." Kaia smiled, her fingers gently threading through his dark, messy hair. The storm was finally over. "Take me home, Julian," she whispered softly. "Our daughter is getting tired." The flight back to Chicago was a blur of high-altitude turbulence and profound, exhausted silence. They were in Julian's private armored helicopter flying above the storm. The cabin was a cocoon of soft, dark leather and advanced medical equipment. Julian was hooked up to an IV, his torn chest heavily bandaged, but he refused to lie down. He sat by Kaia's side, his massive blood-stained hand tightly entwined with hers, his golden eyes locked onto her face as if he were trying to memorize every atom of her existence. He had broken his back to save her. He had lied to her face and shattered her heart to keep her alive. And she had risen from the dead and rewritten the laws of physics to protect him. The mate bond once severed was now a roaring, vibrant thing between them. Julian could feel the powerful, calm hum of her ether magic soothing the silver burn in his muscles, and Kaia could feel the raw, visceral pride and absolute adoration radiating from him. But beneath it all, there was a lingering sorrow, a poignant reminder of how easily the world could take what they cherished most. The helicopter touched down on the private roof pad of the ironclad Spire. Lucian and the Huyat Vey were waiting a sea of black tactical gear and lethal loyalty. They looked at Julian naked to the waist and covered in scars, and then they looked at Kaia, who was radiating a soft, full-body halo of white light. Lucian, the hardened beta, who had seen 1,000 atrocities, locked eyes with Kaia, and slowly dropped to one knee, lowering his head in a gesture of absolute fealty. The entire death squad followed suit, a silent army, bowing to a newborn queen. They didn't see the sterling Runt anymore. They saw the legend. The elevator took them down to the penthouse. Lucian had mobilized a restoration team immediately after the attack, and the doors of the private suite opened to reveal that the home was already perfectly restored. The broken glass, the blood, and the debris were gone, replaced by a deep, luxurious quiet and the comforting scent of rain and starlight. Julian carried Kaia over the new threshold, refusing to let her bare feet touch the floor. He brought her to their bedroom, placing her gently onto the center of the massive bed, with the black silk sheets. For the last 3 months she had been a guest, a payment, a protected asset. Tonight she was home. The next few hours were a sanctuary. Julian cleaned himself up, scrubbing away the blood of the Syndicate before returning to her. He knelt beside the bed, carefully removing her silver cuffs. They had already begun to disintegrate under her ether, but he wanted to physically undo the damage his enemies had done. He kissed the burns on her wrists and ankles, his tears tracking through the soap on his face. Kaia ran her fingers through his dark, messy hair, soothing the tension in his broad shoulders. "It's over, Julian," she whispered softly. "I know," he murmured, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her vanilla and starlight scent. I'm so damn proud of you, my soul. I learned from the best." She smiled, a genuine, joyful expression that illuminated her face. Then Julian's massive hand drifted down to her heavily pregnant stomach. He froze. His golden eyes went wide. "Lucian," he growled telepathically. "Get the medical team, now." Kaia let out a gasp, her body jerking as a sharp, localized surge of power rippled through her core. "It's not time," she panted. "I'm only 7 months. Your ether didn't just wake up Kaia," Julian said, his voice laced with awe as he shifted into his protect mode. "It evolved your pregnancy. The pup isn't waiting. She knows she's safe now." The next 12 hours were a crucible of pain, love, and primeval power. Julian's top medical team, now vetted and personally secured by Lucian, were on standby in the master suite, but they were useless. No mortal medicine, no human science could handle what was about to happen. The penthouse didn't shake. It hummed. Every time Kaia let out a cry of pain, a wave of incandescent white light pulsed from her body, temporarily neutralizing gravity in the entire room. The heavy medical equipment began to levitate before crashing back down as the wave receded. Julian was at her head, bare-chested and brutalized, letting her crush his hand with her newly awakened strength. He didn't offer empty comforts. He offered raw, visceral support. "Focus, my queen," he roared over the atmospheric hum. "Push through it. You are the ether. You don't serve this pain. You command it." It was an agonizing dance of light and dark. But finally, as the sun began to rise over the Chicago skyline, a new sound cut through the silence. It wasn't a growl. It was a cry. A high, clear, powerful wail that seemed to vibrate in the very structure of the building. Kaia collapsed back against the pillows, her white-hot energy fading into a soft, exhausted glow. Julian was trembling uncontrollably as the head doctor, looking pale and awestruck, carefully cleaned the newborn. The doctor approached Julian holding a small bundle wrapped in pristine white silk. His voice was shaking. "Sir, Alpha King, it's a girl." Julian reached out with trembling hands, his fingers covered in battle scars, and his wife's blood looked colossal as he carefully took the tiny creature into his arms. He looked down into the bundle and the breath was violently stolen from his lungs. She was tiny, she was fragile, but she was perfect. Her tiny hand, smaller than Julian's thumbnail, was already clenched into a fist. The child opened her eyes. Julian let out a breathless gasp, a tear spilling down his cheek. "Look at her, my soul," he whispered, his voice thick with raw adoration. "Look at our legacy." Kaia pushed herself up weakly, leaning against Julian's bloodied shoulder. She looked down into the bundle. The child didn't inherit Julian's golden eyes or Kaia's soft green. The baby looked back at them with one eye as black as a starless night, and the other as brilliantly, incandescently white as the cosmos itself. Heterochromia, a physical fusion of the onyx and the ether. She was a fated anomaly, a forbidden miracle, the dawn of a new era. 2 months later, the annual PAC Summit was not held at the Grand Meridian Hotel this year. It was held in the cavernous, reconstructed Great Hall of the Ironclad Spire, a space of obsidian and starlight capable of holding 10,000 people. Every alpha from across the global territories was present. But they were not trading secrets and lies over champagne. They were standing in absolute terrified silence, looking up at the high dais at the front of the room. The rumors were true. The Apex Syndicate was gone. Kalen was a powerless human runt hidden away in a safe house, forced to live with the knowledge of his own weakness. Silas Sterling, Kaia's biological father, had died months ago, his name erased from all shifter history. The world was changing. The double doors of the hall opened. Alpha Julian Vane of Ironclad, Queen Kaia of Ironclad. Julian and Kaia walked in together. Julian was in a tuxedo that fit him like tactical armor, his golden eyes scanning the crowd with a predator's warning. But he was not leading. He was walking shoulder to shoulder with the woman on his arm. Kaia wore a gown of liquid white silk, custom-fitted to her powerful new frame. It was backless, revealing the flawless, unblemished skin of her back. She didn't have to bleed anymore. She radiated a subtle, mesmerizing halo of white energy that made the hair on every alpha's arm stand up. She didn't shrink. She didn't look for approval. She walked with the absolute bone-deep authority of a ruler. They ascended the high dais. At the top stood Lucian holding a velvet pillow. On the pillow sat 2 objects of breathtaking power: the black diamond crown of the Onyx Alpha and a newly forged crown of ether crystal and pure silver. Julian turned to Kaia. He looked at the woman the world had called a ghost, a runt, a mistake. He looked at the girl in the gray cardigan who served coffee and saw the only thing he had ever bowed to. He didn't take the Hacklang crown. Julian Vane, the ruthless king of Chicago, dropped to one knee before his mate. He looked up at her golden suns burning in his irises. "For 20 years I ruled this world with teeth and claws. I was a king of destruction, looking for a queen to rule by my side." He took the ether crown from the pillow. He held it up, a symbol of absolute submission. "I was wrong," Julian whispered, his voice carrying telepathically through the silent hall, vibrating in the soul of every alpha present. "I am not your King Kaia. I am your sword. I am your shield. You are the ether. You are the source. You don't rule by my side." With a deep, reverent sigh, Julian placed the ether crown on Kaia's head. "You rule us all." The silence in the hall was apocalyptic. Every Alpha King in the room watched paralyzed as the King of Ironclad unraveled and ascended all at once. Lucian was the first to act. He dropped to both knees before Kaia and pressed his forehead into the obsidian floor. "All hail the Ether Queen! All hail the King!" The shout was taken up by the Huyet Vey, and then a tidal wave of submission swept through the hall. Pack alphas from London, US, UK, Canada, men who had never bowed to anyone in their lives, collapsed to their knees, lowering their heads in perfect fealty. They didn't bow out of fear. They bowed out of worship. Kaia looked out at the silent army kneeling at her feet. She thought back to the girl in the oversized gray cardigan invisible in the corner of a boardroom. She thought of the bleeding girl on the cold metal surgical table. She wasn't that girl anymore. She turned back to Julian, who was looking up at her with eyes full of tears and absolute adoration. She took his hand and kissed the knuckles. "Rise, my king," she commanded softly. "We have an empire to build." Kaia thought back to the intro hook of her story. Love between an alpha of pure destruction and a queen of primordial creation isn't a fairy tale. It is a forbidden anomaly. She looked at the crown on her head and the man at her side, and she realized the hook was right. Their love wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better. It was the truth. They sold her for pennies, not knowing she was the currency that bought the world. And today, her debt was finally paid in full. And that, my friends, is the legend of Kaia and Julian, the Aether Queen and the Onyx Alpha. Their story of betrayal, revenge, and forbidden love has been a wild ride, and I am so grateful you shared it with us here at Moonfire Tales. But I'm not done yet. Kaia's final act was a masterstroke of absolute justice, turning her enemies into the very runts they despised. But I want to know from you, do you think Silas Sterling and Caius got off too easy? Or was Kaia's purification the perfect lingering punishment? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. The darker and more creative, the better. And what about that ending? Julian kneeling before her, refusing to rule alone. Is that the ultimate relationship goal? Or what? Let me know if you would want a man who would burn the world just to see you crowned. If you loved this story, please hit that like button and share it with your best friend who loves a fierce, empowered heroine. Don't forget to subscribe to Moonfire Tales and ring that bell so you never miss the next chapter in this urban supernatural universe. And as always, keep reaching for the starlight. See you in the next story.